When the bailiff finally stood and called the room to order, my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Everyone rose. The judge entered, an older woman with steel-gray hair pulled back tight, eyes sharp enough to cut through performance and pretense. She took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and looked down the bench like she'd already smelled something rotten and was waiting to see where it came from. We sat. My parents' lawyer stood first. He spoke smoothly, confidently, the kind of voice that sounded expensive even when it said ugly things. He painted my parents as saints, selfless, aging, struggling. He said they had sacrificed their comfort for my future, that they were now being abandoned by the very child they'd poured their lives into. He used phrases like moral obligation, filial duty, elder neglect. He said my success had turned me cold, that I'd hoarded wealth while my parents suffered. I glanced at them. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue that never quite touched a tear. My father sat rigid, chin lifted, the picture of wounded dignity. I felt sick. Then my lawyer, Sarah, stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize. She simply said, "We intend to show that this case is not about responsibility. It's about entitlement, and that the plaintiffs are attempting to weaponize parenthood to claim ownership over a life they neither supported nor protected." The judge nodded once. And just like that, the stage was set. The inventory. The case dragged through motions and objections, slow and grinding. Every minute felt like a year. But the real turning point came with the court-ordered inventory, the thing my parents had insisted on. They wanted my life laid out in numbers. They wanted the judge to see how much I had. What they didn't realize was that numbers don't just show wealth. They show history. The bailiff stood with a thick stack of papers. The room went silent in that way only courtrooms can, where even breathing feels loud. "Exhibit C," he began. "Inventory of defendant's possessions and asset origin." My father leaned forward, lips twitching upward. The bailiff read, "A two-bedroom condominium purchased by the defendant in 2019. Down payment sourced solely from defendant's personal savings account. Mortgage payments made exclusively from defendant's salary." My mother's smile tightened. "Vehicle, 2021 sedan. Financed entirely in defendant's name. No cosigners." Item after item followed. Furniture, electronics, investment accounts. And every single time the same phrase landed like a hammer. Purchased solely by the defendant. Acquired through defendant's employment. No parental contribution. The confidence on their faces began to crack. But the real damage hadn't even started yet. The past comes to the stand. The bailiff turned a page. "Item 45, he said. Box of childhood belongings. Includes one worn pair of football cleats, youth size 6. My chest tightened. I hadn't known Sarah included that. He continued, reading from the attached note. "These were purchased by the defendant at age 10 using money earned from neighborhood yard work after parents refused to pay registration fees." My mother gasped. The judge looked up. The air shifted. Item 46. Tuition payment receipts to State University totaling £62,000. Paid via student loans in defendant's name and direct payments from defendant's personal checking account. No parental contributions. My father stared at the table. Item 47. Ledger from Tony's Diner documenting wages paid to the defendant as a minor. Cross-referenced with bank statements showing regular withdrawals of approximately 70% of earnings immediately following paydays. He paused. Defendant's sworn affidavit states these funds were handed to the plaintiffs for room and board. No one spoke. Not a sound. This wasn't an inventory anymore. It was a timeline of neglect. A paper trail of control. The lawyer on the other side stopped taking notes. The final item. The bailiff turned the last page. Item 52, he said, voice noticeably tighter now. A framed photograph of the plaintiffs and defendant at the defendant's university graduation. He hesitated. The frame was purchased by the defendant. The photograph was printed by the defendant. Another pause. Note indicates that during the event, the plaintiffs asked the defendant for petrol money to return home. The judge removed her glasses slowly and placed them on the bench. She leaned forward, and when she spoke, her voice was cold enough to freeze the room. The verdict. In all my years on this bench, she said, I have rarely witnessed such a grotesque display of entitlement dressed up as parental duty. My mother opened her mouth. The judge raised a hand. You did not come here seeking justice. You came seeking a payday. From a son you treated not as a child, but as a tenant. She looked directly at them. You did not invest in him. You extracted from him. Then she turned to me. You owe these people nothing. The gavel came down. Case dismissed with prejudice. A pause. Plaintiffs will also be responsible for all legal fees incurred by the defendant. I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty. Aftermath. I walked out of that courthouse lighter than I'd ever been and heavier. Relief flooded in. So did grief. The fantasy that they would ever love me without conditions died in that room, on the record, for everyone to see. I never spoke to them again. A few months later, I sold the condo. Too many ghosts. Too many echoes of that dinner, that lawsuit, that life. I moved to the coast. New city. New start. This time, with no chains. The lesson they never taught me. Here's what I learned. Some parents don't raise children. They raise investments. And when the return doesn't come on their schedule, they call it betrayal. You do not owe your abusers comfort. You do not owe your parents your future, because they gave you a past. You do not owe anyone the life you built just to prove you're grateful. Family isn't blood. Family is who shows up without keeping score. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't forgiving.
The
It's
morning
walking
Daniel
away.
died,
If you
the light
stood with
over
me
Hampstead
through the
Heath
story,
was
know
thin
this.
and undecided.
You're not
The sort
heartless
of London
for protecting
morning
yourself.
that cannot.
You're
The
not
morning
selfish
Daniel
for saying
died.
no.
The light over
And you're not
Hampstead
wrong
Heath
for
was thin
choosing
and
freedom
undecided.
over guilt.
The sort of
If
London
this story
morning
hit
that
you, let me
cannot.
know.
The morning
And if
Daniel
you're fighting
died.
your own
The light over
impossible
Hampstead
battle,
Heath was
don't
thin
give
and
up.
undecided.
Sometimes
The sort of London
justice
morning
does
that
win.
cannot.
I
The
remember the
morning
exact
Daniel
sound the
died.
courtroom
The
door
light over
made when
Hampstead
it
Heath
closed
was thin
behind
and
me.
undecided.
Not a
The
slam.
sort of London
Not
morning
dramatic.
that cannot.
Just
The
a
morning
dull,
Daniel died.
final click.
The light
The
over
kind of sound
Hampstead
that
Heath
tells
was
you there's
thin
no
and
turning
undecided.
back.
The sort of
Courtroom
London
4B
morning
smelled
that
like
cannot.
old paper,
The morning Daniel
cheap
died.
disinfectant,
The
and
light over
nervous sweat.
Hampstead Heath
The
was
kind
thin
of
and
place that
undecided.
pretends to be
The
neutral,
sort of London
but
morning
somehow
that
still
cannot.
feels hostile.
The morning Daniel
My palms
died.
were slick.
The light over
My
Hampstead
fingers
Heath was
trembling
thin
as
and
I rubbed them
undecided.
against the
The
fabric
sort
of
of
my dress
London
pants
morning that
again and
cannot.
again,
The morning
hoping
Daniel
no one
died.
noticed how
The light
badly
over
my body
Hampstead
was
Heath was
betraying
thin
me.
and undecided.
Across the
The
aisle
sort
sat
of
my
London
parents,
morning that cannot.
not beside me,
The morning Daniel
not
died.
behind me,
The light over
across from
Hampstead
me,
Heath was thin
at the
and
plaintiff's
undecided.
table.
The sort
They
of
weren't
London
looking at me
morning
like
that cannot.
parents look at their
The
child.
morning Daniel died.
There was no
The
concern,
light over Hampstead
no
Heath was
sadness,
thin and undecided.
no
The
hesitation.
sort of London
They were
morning
staring
that
at me the
cannot.
way someone
The
looks
morning
at a
Daniel
locked
died.
safe,
The light over
calculating,
Hampstead Heath was
impatient,
thin and
convinced
undecided.
what's inside
The sort
belongs
of
to
London
them.
morning that
They were
cannot.
suing me.
The morning
No,
Daniel died.
that word didn't
The
even
light
capture
over Hampstead
properly.
Heath was
They
thin
were
and
asking the
undecided.
court to take
The sort
control
of
of my
London
life,
morning that cannot.
my savings,
The morning Daniel
my car,
died. The
my
light over
condo,
Hampstead Heath was
everything I
thin
had
and
built with my
undecided.
own
The
hands,
sort of London
all
morning
under the
that
argument
cannot.
that I owed them.
The morning Daniel
As I
died.
sat there waiting
The
for the
light
judge
over
to
Hampstead
enter,
Heath was
one
thin and
thought kept
undecided.
circling my
The
mind
sort
like
of
a
London
vulture.
morning that
Am
cannot.
I the villain here?
The morning
Because
Daniel
when your
died.
own parents
The
look
light
you in
over
the eye
Hampstead
and tell
Heath
you
was
that
thin and
keeping what you earned
undecided.
makes you
The
selfish,
sort of London
that doubt
morning that
cuts deeper
cannot.
than any
The morning
legal
Daniel
threat
died.
ever could.
The light over
Before I
Hampstead
tell
Heath
you
was
what
thin
happened
and
in that
undecided.
courtroom, you
The
need to
sort of
understand
London
something.
morning that cannot.
This wasn't about
The
money.
morning Daniel
This
died.
was the final
The light
battle
over
in a war that
Hampstead Heath
started
was
when
thin
I was
and
5 years
undecided.
old.
The sort of London morning that cannot. The morning Daniel
I was
died.
never a child.
The light over
I was an
Hampstead Heath
invoice.
was thin and undecided.
Some kids grow up
The
feeling
sort of
loved.
London morning that
Others
cannot.
grow up feeling
The morning
invisible.
Daniel died.
I grew
the
up
light
feeling
over Hampstead
expensive.
Heath was thin
From
and
my
undecided.
earliest memories,
The sort of
money
London
wasn't
morning
just something
that
my
cannot.
parents worried about.
The morning Daniel
It was a weapon
died.
they used.
The light over
Every
Hampstead
glass of
Heath
milk,
was thin
every
and
school
undecided.
supply,
The
every
sort of
inch of
London
space I
morning that
occupied
cannot.
in their house
The
came
morning
with a price
Daniel
tag
died.
attached.
The light
Do you
over
know how much
Hampstead
you
Heath
cost
was
us?
thin and
Do you
undecided.
think money
The
grows
sort
on
of
trees?
London morning that cannot.
If it weren't for you,
The morning
we'd
Daniel
have a
died.
much easier
The light
life.
over Hampstead Heath
Those
was
weren't
thin and
occasional
undecided.
comments.
The sort
They
of
were
London
daily
morning that
reminders.
cannot.
My
The morning
parents
Daniel
loved
died.
appearances.
The light over
New
Hampstead
cars
Heath
every
was
couple
thin
of
and
years.
undecided.
Designer
The sort
furniture.
of London morning
Big
that
flat
cannot.
screen TVs.
The morning Daniel
The
died.
image of
The
success
light over
mattered
Hampstead
more than
Heath was
actual
thin and
stability.
undecided.
But when it
The
came
sort
to
of
me,
London morning
I
that cannot.
was an
The morning
unnecessary
Daniel
expense.
died. The
Leave
light
a
over
light on
Hampstead
for 2
Heath was
minutes?
thin and
I
undecided.
get screamed at
The
like
sort
I'd
of
set the
London
house
morning
on
that
fire.
cannot.
Ask
The
for new
morning
shoes
Daniel
because
died.
my
The light
toes
over
were pushing through
Hampstead
the
Heath
front.
was thin and
A financial
undecided.
emergency,
The
my
sort
fault.
of London morning
When I
that
was
cannot.
10, I wanted to
The
join the
morning
school
Daniel
football
died.
team.
The
The
light over
registration
Hampstead
fee
Heath was
was
thin and
40 pounds.
undecided. The
I
sort
was
of
so
London morning
excited
that
I
cannot.
practiced kicking a
The
ball
morning
against the
Daniel
garage
died.
door for weeks
The light
before
over
asking.
Hampstead Heath
My
was thin
dad
and
didn't say no
undecided.
immediately.
The sort of London
Instead,
morning that cannot.
he sat me down at
The
the
morning
kitchen
Daniel
table with a
died.
calculator
The light
and a
over
notebook.
Hampstead Heath was
For
thin
over
and
an hour,
undecided.
he walked me
The
through their
sort of
mortgage,
London morning that
utilities,
cannot.
insurance.
The morning Daniel
All things
died.
I didn't
The
understand.
light over
Before
Hampstead
closing the
Heath was
notebook
thin and
and looking me
undecided.
dead in the eye.
The sort of
Your
London morning that
selfishness, he
cannot.
said,
The
is
morning
how
Daniel
families
died.
go bankrupt.
The light over
I never
Hampstead
asked for
Heath was
football
thin
again.
and undecided.
That was the
The
pattern.
sort of London
I
morning
wasn't
that
a son.
cannot.
I
The
was a
morning Daniel
liability.
died. The light over
Hashtag,
Hampstead Heath was thin and undecided.
16 years
The sort
old
of London
and
morning
already
that
paying
cannot.
rent.
The
By
morning Daniel
16,
died.
I understood
The light
something
over
most kids
Hampstead
don't
Heath was
realize
thin
until
and
adulthood.
undecided.
If
The
I
sort
wanted
of
anything
London
in
morning
life,
that cannot.
I would have to
The
get it
morning
myself.
Daniel died.
So
The light
I got
over
a job
Hampstead
washing
Heath was
dishes
thin
at a
and
local diner.
undecided.
30
The sort
hours
of
a
London
week.
morning that
School
cannot.
during the day.
The morning Daniel
Grease and
died.
steam at
The
night.
light over Hampstead
Weekends
Heath
gone.
was thin and
My
undecided.
first paycheck
The
felt
sort
like
of London
freedom.
morning that
It
cannot.
lasted less
The
than
morning
5
Daniel
minutes.
died.
My
The
mother
light
was
over
waiting when I got
Hampstead Heath
home.
was thin and
She didn't
undecided.
congratulate me.
The sort of London
Didn't ask
morning
how
that
my
cannot.
first shift went.
The morning
She
Daniel
just held out
died.
her hand.
The light over
If you're
Hampstead
earning money
Heath
now,
was thin
she
and
said,
undecided.
you need to
The sort of
contribute.
London morning
Room
that cannot.
and board
The
isn't
morning
free.
Daniel died.
They took
The light over
70% of
Hampstead
my
Heath
wages.
was thin and undecided.
70.
The sort
I was
of
working
London
like
morning
an
that
adult
cannot.
to
The
survive
morning
like a
Daniel
burden.
died.
I wore
the
the
light
same
over
clothes,
Hampstead Heath was
ate
thin
the
and
same
undecided.
cheap cereal.
The sort of
But
London
I did
morning
one
that
thing
cannot.
they never noticed.
The
I
morning
saved.
Daniel died.
I hid cash
The light over
inside a
Hampstead
hollowed-out
Heath was
textbook
thin
in
and
my closet.
undecided.
I
The sort of
opened
London
a
morning
secret
that
online
cannot.
savings account
The
with
morning
no
Daniel
paper
died.
statements.
The light
Money
over
wasn't just
Hampstead
currency
Heath was thin
anymore.
and undecided.
It was escape.
The sort of London morning that cannot. The morning Daniel
college.
died. The
Figure
light
it out
over
yourself.
Hampstead Heath was
When
thin and
university came up,
undecided.
the
The sort of
conversation was
London
short.
morning that cannot.
We're not paying.
The morning
My
Daniel
dad said,
died.
flipping
the light
channels
over
on their
Hampstead
massive
Heath was
new
thin
TV.
and undecided.
You're 18.
The sort of London
You're an
morning
adult.
that cannot.
Figure it out.
The morning Daniel
So
died.
I did.
The light over
Loans in my
Hampstead
own
Heath was
name.
thin and
2
undecided.
jobs.
The sort of
Shared
London
flats
morning that
with
cannot.
4 other guys.
The morning Daniel
Ramen
died.
noodles
The
and
light over
exhaustion.
Hampstead Heath
I
was
missed
thin and
parties.
undecided.
Missed
The
trips.
sort of London
Missed
morning that
everything
cannot.
people call the
morning
college
Daniel
experience.
died. The light over
But I
Hampstead
graduated,
Heath was thin and
and
undecided.
my parents showed
The
up
sort
like
of
heroes.
London morning that cannot.
Photos.
The morning Daniel
Smiles.
died.
Facebook
The light over
posts about their
Hampstead Heath was
sacrifices.
thin and
They
undecided.
took credit for
The
my
sort of
success
London
the
morning
same
that
way
cannot.
they'd always
The
taken
morning
credit for my
Daniel died.
existence.
The light over Hampstead Heath was thin and undecided.
Success
The sort of
was
London
the invitation
morning that
they'd been
cannot.
waiting for.
The morning Daniel
After
died.
graduation,
The
I
light
got
over
lucky and
Hampstead
worked
Heath was
myself
thin and
nearly to
undecided.
collapse.
The sort of
A
London
junior
morning
role
that
at a
cannot.
tech firm.
The morning
80-hour
Daniel
weeks.
died. The
No
light over
life.
Hampstead Heath
No
was thin and
balance.
undecided.
Just code.
The sort of
sleep,
London morning
repeat.
that cannot.
7
The
years
morning
later,
Daniel died.
I had something
The
I
light over
never had
Hampstead
before.
Heath was thin
Stability.
and undecided.
I paid
the
off
sort
my
of London
loans,
morning that
bought
cannot.
a reliable
The morning
car.
Daniel died.
Then the big one.
The light over Hampstead
condo.
Heath was thin and
Not
undecided.
flashy.
The sort
Not
of London
huge,
morning that
but
cannot.
mine.
The morning
I posted
Daniel
one
died.
photo online,
The light over
holding the
Hampstead
keys.
Heath was thin and
That's when they
undecided.
came back.
The sort of
Calls.
London morning that cannot.
Messages.
The morning
Suddenly
Daniel
they
died.
wanted to
The light
reconnect.
over Hampstead
Against
Heath was
my
thin
better
and
judgment,
undecided.
I
The
invited
sort
them
of
over.
London morning that
It was a
cannot.
mistake I'll regret
The morning
forever.
Daniel died.
They
The
criticized
light
the
over
paint,
Hampstead Heath was
touched
thin and
everything,
undecided.
counted
The sort
silently.
of London morning that
Then
cannot.
came the proposal.
The morning Daniel
They didn't
died.
ask for help.
The light over
They
Hampstead
demanded
Heath was
tribute.
thin and undecided.
Pay off their mortgage.
The sort of
Buy
London
them a
morning
new
that
car.
cannot.
Give them
The
a
morning
monthly
Daniel
allowance,
died.
larger
The light
than
over
my own
Hampstead
mortgage.
Heath was thin and
Because we
undecided.
raised you,
The sort
my
of
mother
London
said.
morning that
You
cannot.
owe us.
The morning Daniel
That night
died.
ended
The
in
light
screaming.
over Hampstead
And
Heath was
6
thin
weeks
and
later,
undecided.
it ended in
The
court
sort of
papers.
London morning that cannot.
Hashtag,
The morning
hashtag,
Daniel
hashtag.
died. The
And
light
that's
over
how I
Hampstead
ended up in
Heath was
courtroom
thin and
4B,
undecided.
sitting alone,
The sort of London
across
morning that
from the
cannot.
people who taught me
The morning
that
Daniel
love always
died,
comes
the
with a
light
bill.
over Hampstead
As the
Heath was
bailiff
thin and
prepared to call the
undecided.
room to order,
The sort of
I
London
asked
morning that
myself
cannot.
one final
The
question.
morning Daniel died,
Should I have just
the
paid them
light
to
over
make it
Hampstead
stop?
Heath was thin
Or
and
was
undecided.
fighting back the
The
only
sort
way
of
to
London
ever be
morning
free?
that cannot.